Do you ever feel like you're in control of your thoughts, only to realize later that something deeper was pulling the strings? What if the very thing you call your strength, your certainty, your confidence, is actually what's holding you back? Let's talk about the price of true growth and why becoming stronger mentally often feels so lonely, through the eyes of a 19th century philosopher who saw through our illusions better than most, Arthur Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer's big idea was simple but brutal. Most of what we think is our own reasoning is really just our will, our instincts, desires, and fears disguised as logic. He put it bluntly: every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world. In other words, we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. And that's where the trouble begins. You probably recognize that stubborn feeling of being right, even when the evidence starts to pile up against you. Many of us cling to familiar ideas because they feel safe, like a well-worn path in the woods. But Schopenhauer would say, that's not wisdom, it's inertia. Remember when you realized a childhood belief wasn't quite true? That moment of discomfort, that slight embarrassment for having held onto it so long. That's the first crack in the wall. Growth starts there, in that unease. The problem is, our minds are wired to resist that feeling. We'd rather be certain than correct, comfortable than expanded. Think about the last time someone challenged a deeply held opinion of yours. Even if they were polite, even if they made sense, there was probably a hot flash of defiance, a voice in your head scrambling to defend your position. Schopenhauer called this the will to live, the primal force in us that fights to preserve itself, even at the cost of truth. This is why mental growth feels lonely. It's not just that others might not understand the changes you're going through, it's that part of you doesn't want to change either. Every step forward means leaving something behind, a version of yourself that once felt solid, a way of thinking that used to make the world make sense. And that's isolating. Have you ever tried to explain a personal breakthrough to someone only to watch their eyes glaze over? Or worse, to see them subtly dismiss it because it doesn't fit their own worldview? That's the tension Schopenhauer saw everywhere. We crave connection, but truth often pulls us away from the crowd. Here's where it gets trickier. The more you grow, the more you start to see how much of life runs on autopilot. Not just for you, but for everyone. You notice the scripts people follow, the unconscious patterns they mistake for choice. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's another layer of loneliness. It's like waking up in a room where everyone else is sleepwalking. You want to shake them, but you also know they'd resent you for it. Schopenhauer understood this better than anyone. He knew that most people would rather stay in the warm fog of illusion than face the cold air of reality. But here's the paradox. The very thing that isolates you is also what sets you free. That discomfort, that sense of being out of step, is actually a sign you're moving towards something real. Schopenhauer believed that true strength comes from facing the world as it is, not as we wish it to be, and that requires a kind of courage most people never find, because it means admitting how much we don't know, how often we've been wrong, how deeply we've fooled ourselves. So if you've ever felt alone in your growth, like you're losing old friends or outgrowing old habits, Schopenhauer would tell you this isn't a flaw, it's the cost of clarity. The loneliness isn't forever. It's just the space between who you were and who you're becoming. And the further you go, the more you'll find others who've walked the same path. They're rare, but they're out there. This cracks open a truth we often overlook. Mental growth doesn't happen in a straight line. It's more like a winding path through unfamiliar terrain, and the further we go, the lonelier it can feel. But this loneliness isn't a sign of failure, it's a sign of transformation. To understand why, let's walk through the 3 natural phases of this journey and how each one shapes us in ways we don't always see coming. In the beginning, we see things simply. Life feels straightforward, and our reactions are automatic. If someone cuts us off in traffic, we yell. If a friend cancels plans, we assume the worst. This is where most of us start, operating on autopilot, relying on knee-jerk reactions because they're easy and familiar. Arthur Schopenhauer called this the default state of human nature. We act first and think later, if at all. It's comfortable because it requires no effort, no questioning. But comfort isn't growth. You might be someone who resists change at first, clinging to the simplicity of these patterns because they feel safe. And that's normal. We all do. The problem is, life doesn't stay simple forever. Then comes the confusing middle. This is where things get complicated, and it's also where most people get stuck. Suddenly, the old reactions don't work like they used to. That anger you used to vent freely now leaves you feeling empty. The assumptions you relied on start to feel shaky. Schopenhauer saw this phase as inevitable, the moment we confront the friction between our old ways and the new awareness we're developing. It's uncomfortable because it forces us to question everything. Most of us feel uneasy during transitions like this, and that's because we're caught between who we were and who we're becoming. You might notice yourself hesitating more, pausing before reacting lately, as if part of you is waiting for a better way forward. This is the tough part. The middle phase is where growth feels like loss, because it asks us to let go of what we've always known. But if we keep going, something shifts. The confusion starts to clear, and we enter the 3rd phase, new clarity. This isn't about having all the answers. It's about seeing the questions differently. Where we once reacted without thinking, we now respond with intention. Schopenhauer contrasted these 2 modes of being, the impulsive, reactive self, and the thoughtful, deliberate one. The latter doesn't come naturally. It's earned through the discomfort of the middle phase. We start noticing small changes in ourselves, like how we no longer rush to judgment, or how we can sit with uncertainty without panicking. These subtle shifts are the markers of real growth. They're also why this journey feels lonely. Not everyone around us will understand why we're changing, or why we're no longer content with the old ways. But that's okay. The loneliness is temporary, a side effect of outgrowing what once fit us. The Barnum effect tells us that vague statements often feel deeply personal, like, you might be someone who resists change at first, or most of us feel uneasy during transitions. These resonate because they're universal truths dressed in personal language. And that's the thing about mental growth. It follows patterns we all share, even when it feels isolating. We start by seeing things simply. Then we struggle through the confusing middle, and eventually, we find a new way of being. But the middle is where the magic happens. It's where we learn to tolerate discomfort, to question our instincts, and to choose our responses instead of letting them choose us. Through this discomfort, we discover that true strength isn't about never feeling lonely or uncertain. It's about moving forward anyway, even when the path isn't clear. It's about trusting that the confusion is part of the process, and that the loneliness is just a sign that we're growing beyond what we once knew. And slowly, without fanfare, we realize we've become someone who can handle more than we ever thought possible. That's the price of true strength, and also its reward. Through this discomfort, we begin to see the cracks in what we once thought was solid ground. It's unsettling, like realizing the map you've been following is missing entire roads. But here's the thing, those cracks let in light. They show us where we've been clinging to ideas that don't fit anymore, where we've been forcing ourselves into shapes that were never meant for us. And while it might feel like losing something at first, it's really the beginning of making space for what actually belongs. You'll likely find daily decisions coming easier once you stop fighting against your own instincts. It's not that life suddenly gets simpler, but the noise starts to fade. The choices that used to tie you in knots begin to feel clearer, not because the stakes are lower, but because you're no longer trying to please invisible judges. Many notice old frustrations don't bother them as much. The slow line at the grocery store, the friend who always runs late. It's not that these things change. You do. The weight of them lifts because you're not carrying the extra burden of pretending to be someone you're not. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It's more like waking up a little each day to the parts of yourself you've been ignoring. Maybe it starts with catching yourself mid-sentence, realizing you were about to say yes when you meant no. Or maybe it's the quiet recognition that a goal you've been chasing doesn't even feel like yours anymore. These moments add up. They're not grand epiphanies, but small, steady steps toward a way of living that actually fits. Together, we discover that freedom isn't about having no constraints. It's about no longer being trapped by the ones we didn't even see. It's like finally taking off shoes that never quite fit, as Arthur Schopenhauer put it. You didn't realize how much they were pinching until you slipped them off. And suddenly, walking feels different, lighter, more yours. This journey isn't about arriving at some perfect version of yourself. It's about coming home to the one you've always been. And that's where the real magic happens. Not in becoming someone new, but in uncovering who was there all along. The rest is just steps forward, one after the other, into a life that feels less like a performance and more like living. And isn't that what we all want? To stop pretending, to stop straining, and to just be. Not perfectly, but fully. Together, we're learning how.